Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. A lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand! Good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's very special live stream. Tonight we will be talking to Joel Skousen, an expert on world affairs. We had Joel on over a month ago talking about the impact of the lockdown on business. So much has changed since then. One of the issues we will be focusing on is the George Floyd, Antifa and Black Lives Matter situation. Who is behind it? Why has Soros not been put behind bars, etc.? Another subject we will be discussing is the fake news. We will be discussing why the mainstream media are the main instigators of much of the world's problems today. Let's have a look at a short video that kind of encapsulates what I'm talking about.
Wait a minute. Peter didn't shoot my son. I did. Peter was just taking the blame for me. He's a good friend.
Mr. Brown, what exactly are you saying?
I'm saying that I, Cleveland Brown, a black man, shot Cleveland Brown Jr., another black man.
Wait, where did everybody go?
You want to make the media go away? Just mention black-on-black crime. Wait a minute. Peter...
Okay, I think that kind of sums up the situation when it comes to the media, and I'm sure that most people here would agree with me regarding that. Now, let me get our guest on. Joel, I won't be a second. Here we go. Hi, Joel.
Hello, Scotty. How are you doing?
Excellent, mate. Excellent. Good to see you again.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Thank you. And how is life treating you?
Well, it's actually fairly normal here in rural America. There's no shutdown. There's no mask. There's, people still believe the hype, I guess, but it's just pretty normal here in rural country. But if you're in one of the big cities, you're still under the new normal, which will never go away, I predict.
Right. Well, I have to tell you a very strange story that happened in Australia over the weekend. We had these Black Lives Matter marches, you probably heard about it in the major cities. And it now turns out that one of the protesters who was milling with the crowds, and there were tens of thousands of them, has been found to be infectious with COVID-19. And this is after, for months, Australia has been religiously staying with the social distancing. This could have destroyed months of good work.
Well, I have to differ with you on that. The test is simply not valid. The test does not isolate COVID-19. You can test positive for any coronavirus, including the common cold. And so even Dr. Kerkhoff of the WHO, quite unauthorized, I believe, came out and said that the data they have at the WHO indicates the people who are non-symptomatic are not a threat to anyone else. This destroys the entire justification for wearing masks, social distancing, etc., because 80% of the people who are tested for COVID-19 that are positive have no symptoms at all.
Yeah, they're asymptomatic.
Rather than question the efficacy of the test, that it's really testing for a dangerous virus, COVID-19, they simply assume that it is and use it to drive everyone into social distancing when it isn't valid.
Right.
Now
we're going to get into the COVID-19 situation shortly, but before we do, I want to kick off tonight's conversation with the media bias that is so apparent in the mainstream media globally. There are so many examples of completely different media companies parroting off exactly the same statement, word for word, through their reporters, and examples of non-reporting of real news like black on white violence, while they focus on non-issues like George Floyd, who was a criminal high on drugs at the time of his untimely death. What are your views on what is happening in the world today and the media's role in this?
Well, clearly the media is backing the COVID-19 false pandemic and the Black Lives Matter, which is not about Black Lives Matter. As I'm covering in tomorrow's World Affairs Brief, there was a very telling sign by one of the Black Lives Matter protesters that said, "No freedom until black equality." Now, that's a much broader agenda than, talking about mere opportunity. They're talking about you don't have any freedom. You're never going to have your freedom again until everybody is equal in terms of outcome. They're not talking about mere opportunity. They want equality of outcome, which is impossible. Even among whites, it's impossible to have equality of outcome. So these people really are against the free market, the Western work ethic, the Western ability to judge other people freely. You have the freedom to judge. That's under attack now. You're not going to be allowed to freely judge anyone as negative or unequal because of so this is a much larger agenda. And it's a dual agenda. It's very interesting that both of these attacks on Western culture came up in the last 3 months. A falsified pandemic, using a falsified test and attributing, hundreds of thousands of deaths to people who have chronic illness that didn't die of COVID, attributing it to COVID in order to drive an agenda that says you cannot be free again until you abide by these restrictions to your liberty permanently or take a vaccine, which is equally dangerous. And now the Black Lives Matter. This is only a pretense. The racial issue of George Floyd is a pretense to push a massive agenda of destruction of American justice and law enforcement institutions. The Communist Manifesto couldn't have written it better.
Right. Now, I just want to address the side chat for a second. Please, guys, put your questions to Joel in the side chat, and I'd ask the moderators to copy those so I can present them to Joel later. And don't forget to subscribe. Now, just carrying on with this point about the media. I mean, I really want you to explain to us who actually controls the media. And I want to give you an example. Reuters, that organization that provides the media with all their stories.
Yeah.
My understanding is that is run or owned by the Rockefeller family.
Well, not directly. They use a lot of tiered front corporations to do these things, but there are actually probably only 4 or 5 major media corporations now, like Mr. Rupert Murdoch, who owns the Wall Street Journal and Fox News and others. And these are clearly globalists, as well as the Rockefeller Group. In essence, the deep state controls the media, and it's clear that through their news sharing system, which happens behind the scene, you get the same talking points. I've seen video presentations which you go through on an evening news on a critical issue that the deep state is pushing. And you can go through station after station. These are local stations, not just national, NBC, ABC, or CBS in the United States. And they have the exact same wordage. We're talking about 15 or 20 different stations. And what are the chances that independently these talking heads could come up? Now, the talking heads, of course, only read a script. It's the people in the background that control the agenda of the news, and they are reading a script from a unified source. And, clear back in the Alien Gonzalez era in the United States, this poor little kid that was trying to be forced back into Cuba eventually did. There was a leak from one of the major or local news stations in Florida that actually said, we got orders from this particular source, to come out against, keeping Alien Gonzalez in the United States. So there really is, and this is one of the best kept secrets in the world of who's actually running the show. Nobody knows who runs. We know that George Soros is involved, that Henry Kissinger is involved, Rockefellers have long been involved, the Rothschilds, etc. But nobody knows because they control the media, they control the NSA, they control spying, who's actually calling the shots. But in fact, we don't need to know. We know that somebody's calling the shot because of the uniformity of the message, which is not a free market. Right. As you're pointing out.
Well, I can tell you that News Limited in 1987, when we had the crash, basically was bankrupt. And it was bailed out by Wall Street and big players in Wall Street. And Murdoch since then has basically been beholden to those people who bailed him out. I don't know what agreement was made, but he was basically on his ass. He was gone. But because he had the media strength, Wall Street came out and they actually bailed him out at that point in time.
Well, but you mustn't misinterpret that. That doesn't necessarily mean that they started to control him at that point. It's also possible they bailed him out because he was already part of the deep state and controlling media on their behalf.
Could well be. Yeah. Now, okay. Is the media's infatuation with Black Lives Matter at this point in time, and I've got to tell you, it's all over the Australian mainstream media, as if, this poor guy, look, this is so terrible what happened to him, and they're basically supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, which is funded by Soros. But my point is the media's infatuation with Black Lives Matter a covert operation to see Trump removed as president following the 2020 presidential elections?
Yes, and that's only part of the agenda. Obviously, they want to make America ungovernable to make Trump look bad prior to the agenda. But in the larger sense, though, the Black Lives Matter thing, they don't care about Black Lives Matter. This is a front. This is an excuse in order to justify a continuation of the socialist juggernaut that they're trying to implant on America. I mean, they're halfway there already. America's got a lot of socialist programs, but they want it fully. They want basic income for everybody. They want the police to be disbanded. And incredibly, there's 2 or 3 cities in the United States that are actually full of left liberal people on the city councils that are seriously considering these things.
Yeah.
In Europe, the Black Lives Matter thing is a big in protest. But look, there's no Black Lives Matter movement in Europe. They're simply jumping on this bandwagon because there is a deep state component in the EU as well. The deep state is really the enforcement arm of the larger globalist agenda, which controls the EU, which controls Boris Johnson, who sold out Brexit, who controls the Australian prime ministers who have been socialists for now many years. and New Zealand as well. And so this is a major agenda to destroy Western culture, the free markets, and the free market of judgment. I mean, they don't want, this is an actual attack on free speech. I'm covering in tomorrow's World Affairs Brief the litany of people who are being fired. We're talking about certified liberals and leftists at the New York Times and at other major newspapers being fired because they did not take a sufficiently strong position in favor of Black Lives Matter. One person was even fired for saying all lives matter.
Wow.
You are insufficiently, backing this movement. But it isn't that they care a whit about blacks themselves. This is a justification to go after Western culture, Western values, and free market values, and above all, your freedom of speech, not theirs. They want your freedom of speech taken down in the name of political correctness. So this is PC politics on steroids, and they're going to put, and it's sad to see the politicians and even the police genuflecting, bowing the knee to these protesters.
Yeah. Look, I have to tell you that major platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter are biased against right-leaning channels like this one. This Loving Life channel was demonetized in May last year, along with tens of thousands of others on the same day, in an orchestrated attempt to shut down our collective voice by removing the financial incentive. Despite the fact I've had no community or copyright strikes on this channel for over a year, 2 attempts to get it remonetized have been rejected by YouTube because of hate speech. And how important is the alternative media right now at this time in history?
Well, it's absolutely crucial, and that's why Alex Jones has gone to his own video channel, bannedvideo.com, in order to get his message out, because he was banned monetarily 2 years ago, and it hurt him in the terms of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
But look, we know that the alternative media message is getting through because they're attacking it so virulently. They want the media, dead, and it's not happening. I mean, the media, the more that they try to suppress it, the more that it is enlivened, because we realize, and more people are waking up, that there is an actual conspiracy to take down our liberty and our freedom of speech.
Yeah. Now just getting back to Donald Trump, if Joe Biden did become president of the U.S., God forbid, what would be the end? Would that be the end of alternative media like YouTube and channels like mine?
Well, no, they really like to hide behind the image that these companies are private. I don't believe they are private. I think they have got into bed with government, are protected by government because they toe the line, because they censor. And it's not that they protest. All of these guys are left liberal. And I use liberal. Liberal was hijacked by the left. It used to be a term referring to libertarian type thought in politics. They've hijacked liberal, they've hijacked progressive, they've hijacked all of the good words for themselves, and then bestowed upon the right wing the term of fascism or neo-Nazism, which is a socialist movement. They throw Hitler at us and take for themselves the name of the progressive.
Right.
This is a very, very evil agenda, and it's not going to go away. Now, I don't think Biden is even going to be the Democratic nominee. I think clearly he's incompetent. He would be crucified by Trump in a debate. He's been responsible for that quid pro quo and admitted it before a CFR gathering on video. Trump advertising would show that. But Biden's just going to make too many mistakes. I think they're setting the stage for Biden to pick Hillary Clinton as a vice president. And then when he bows down because of these women who have complained about his sexual abuse, she would be the natural to follow on. Hillary Clinton runs the Democratic Party. Her operatives are throughout there, and I think they're still waiting in the wings for that setup to happen, and we'll see that happen this summer.
Right. Now, I want to turn to one of those lefty organizations that we've been talking about, and that is Open Society Foundation. Why can't George Soros be arrested for funding Antifa, which is clearly a terrorist organization?
Well, the problem is, in order to arrest and convict, you have to have you'd have to eavesdrop on his actual conversations, linking him directly to those with intent to subvert the United States. And the deep state controls the NSA. They would never give you the information. They would say that there's nothing there. And even if they did, and if you were able to ferret out, the conversations that linked him directly to those things, the judges who are deep state controlled and prosecutors many of them are deep state controlled, would not prosecute. That's the problem with the deep state. This is not just a bunch of Obama holdovers in the Trump administration trying to undermine Trump. This is a lethal organization, the law enforcement, the illegal law enforcement arm of the globalist conspiracy. They killed John F. Kennedy. They killed Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King for the martyr effect. They ran 9/11. I mean, this is a deadly organization. They run ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. This is not just a political operative system on the left. And that's why it's in a terribly powerful position, controls the FBI, the CIA. There's a dark side of those organizations. They control it at the top, and they have dark side operators within each of those organizations, including the DEA, which runs drugs on behalf of the deep state, etc.
Wow. I just find it extraordinary that any right-thinking individual, and I'm not talking right-winger, but if you think just clearly, you can see there is something very, very wrong happening in the world today. And it's not rocket science. You can see that there's an agenda going on. Now, you aren't able to say exactly who the deep state are collectively, but who do you think the people actually running the show are? Who are the kings? Is it the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds who are right at the top of the tree? Who do you think is actually pulling the strings from the top?
Well, I do think that George Soros is one of those. Henry Kissinger has long been one of those. Zbigniew Brzezinski was one of those pulling the strings from the top. But, nobody except someone at that level of the people that I mentioned would know if there's someone above them, and I believe there are, who keep very, very secretive and behind the scenes. I don't think we'll ever know. And it's not productive, in fact, to try to find out, because I think that's going to be futile. They control all the levers of power within each of the European governments, including your government, my government, etc., and they can stop anyone. Even if I were president, you could not stop the NSA from telling you, we don't have anything. We're not going to obey your orders. What do you do? In fact, it's just very, very difficult. The government is so big, the deep state is so big and so powerful that I don't think it's ever going to be stopped. And so it isn't productive to really even try to find out or guess, because that's all we're going to do. They'll never let you behind the veil and see who's there behind manipulating things. But it's enough to know that, and people are waking up. That's one thing you pointed out very well, Scott. I mean, you have to be brain dead almost not to see these things. And so even as they manipulate hard to destroy Donald Trump, even as he gives in to most of their demands, that's what's interesting, is they still can't stand not having a puppet. They have to work too hard to keep him in line. He keeps going back once they convince him to do things. He keeps trying to get out of Syria or to not follow their agenda, and they have to keep convincing him. This is delaying their agenda. Donald Trump is not saving us. He's not draining the deep swamp. His own Attorney General, Bill Barr, is deep state as you can get, who's playing loyal to Donald Trump, but isn't. He's still covering up for the deep state. This is a real tough battle here that we're fighting, and it's only through openly discussing conspiracy, and even though we can't name who's running the show, we can see the hand of conspiracy in the media, what you've described, in politicians. And they're coming out of the woodwork. I was shocked, frankly, when I looked at COVID-19 and how many Republican governors went along in abject, and a lot of that's not because they're deep state, it's because they're just yes men. They have no courage, they have no guts, they will not stand against the establishment media. They know that they'd be crucified, and so We have a bunch of lackeys and yes men even in conservative Republican circles in this nation.
Right. Now, before we actually move on to the coronavirus and those theories that you were talking about at the very start, there's a more local issue for the South African viewers who are watching right now I want to run past you. The President of South Africa, Ramaphosa, said in a speech last week that the lockdown was the best thing that could have happened for black economic transformation, implying that he was happy to see small white-owned businesses going bankrupt, and out of the ashes black-owned businesses would arise and replace them. Do you have a message for Ramaphosa?
Yeah, it won't happen. There is a reason why white entrepreneurship has happened, and it has to do with their own innate ability to want to rise up and not depend on government, to do something on your own. And you can't train that into people. I believe in innateness. I think there's innate entrepreneurial spirit in blacks, in a few of them, but not nearly as much as there happens to be in other cultures. And, that's illegal and improper and politically incorrect to say that. But there are differences. And now you can talk about the differences of black athletes and how superior they are in many ways to white athletes. You can't ever talk about the superiority of whites in terms of entrepreneurship and inventiveness and creativity in certain areas of culture, business, and scientific achievement. But, that's a pipe dream, and time will prove it out. Yeah, you're going to destroy a lot of business. Over 30% of small businesses are so financially damaged by the COVID false pandemic in the United States, they may never reopen. That's a massive hit on the economy. And you will not see minorities come in and take the place, except minorities that are very industrious and engineering, and the Asians tend to be that way. And we're not allowed to make racial things, but I will make them. That the Asians are very industrious and sometimes ruthless in terms of their ability to move in. And blacks in the United States hate a lot of the Asians that have moved in and taken advantage of the economic vacuum that is created by lack of black entrepreneurship. That isn't to say the blacks are incapable of it. Some are, but a lesser percentage. It's been my observation.
Right. Now, there are two words that seem to be very, very up in front right now. The one word is transformation, and the other word is reset after the lockdown. Now, both these words sound very dangerous to me. It's like a reset on the way humanity sees itself. What are your views on this?
Well, they control the narrative in terms of what the reset is. They will control what the new normal, that's the big catchword here in the United States. The new normal means, that you're going to permanently lose some of your liberties. We are permanently losing the ability to criticize and to make class judgments, for example. That's viewed as universal evil, but everybody makes them. Everybody makes class judgments because you don't have the time as an individual to judge each person as an individual, even though you may like to. You don't have the time. You will make class judgments if you're an employer. You may not be able to say it openly now, but they're still being made, and you're going to have to do all kinds of somersaults to justify how you make a decision based on a class. And look at it. You can see when you look at the rioters, predominantly they're black, but not just black. Even the whites that are rioting are a low-class variety. Tattoos, gang markings. These are people who are hostile to society. You're going to make class judgments. You're going to see people who dress like that in the black hoods and the other thing. You're going to make negative judgments because you don't have time to stop and say, can I get to know you? And let's just see if you're really as bad as I think you are. Everybody has limited time, and you're going to make class and group judgments based upon what you have seen in the past. And that's a good thing. It helps us to go forward in society. If we had to make an individual interview judgment on every person we meet, we'd be at risk of being stabbed or shot by some of these people because they take advantage of that closeness. And you learn from experience that in class judgments that you don't get close to certain low-class individuals who are criminal-minded. The same thing in South Africa. When I was there, it was very clear. You could tell who some of the hostile blacks who were part of Winnie Mandela's group that would necklace people
Right.
and come out against you. And you avoided those type of people. You'd be a fool to go into the black ghettos, and pretend as if you're some stupid liberal who doesn't know what's going on. They'll take advantage of that. You end up dead.
Right. Now, there's a huge amount of verbal inferences by senior politicians in South Africa that puts the blame of the implosion of the gangster state on the minority white population. For example, they're always blaming Jan van Riebeck and apartheid whenever something goes wrong. The reality is the corruption, ineptitude, and racist policies of the ANC government. How do we get the truth out there in front of the man in the street? Because the mainstream media won't.
Well, there's no way to do that, actually. They control the media, and that's why they control the media, is because they don't want the mainstream to do it. And so you have to depend. This is where people underestimate the fact of the workings of conscience. That's really our only salvation is that some people are going to have to be prompted to go to the alternative media. They're not going to ever get it through the mainstream. We're never going to be able to control it. This is a downhill run. The only people who are coming out of the mainstream to the alternative media and seeing and finally waking up are people who get a prompting from conscience says, something's not right about what I'm hearing. Something's not right. And, in order to get those conferences, you kind of have to live right. A conscience is something that is not just absolute. You have to train it. You have to learn to listen to the promptings. You have to learn to, a lot of those promptings are temporal. To get up when you don't feel like getting up, to work when you don't feel like working, to lose weight when you don't feel like it. When you listen to those promptings, you school your prompting, your conscience into feeling the right signals. And when people are blind, it's not just because they haven't been educated. How else do we explain how people go through the same public schools with the same propaganda of the left and don't believe it? It's because they have a more active conscience. They're getting signals that says something's wrong. And people who don't get those signals, something's wrong with them. That's what I'm saying, Scott. They have got a defective conscience over the years of saying no or of wanting to be willfully blind because they have ambition to be accepted by the establishment. And we're never going to win those people. We're never going to win those people. We can only hope to win the people who sense that something's wrong. And that's why I don't worry about trying to get my message to mainstream people who haven't got a clue, who don't want to have a clue. I'm looking for people who are disturbed by what they see.
Right. Now, I have to tell you that I was about to say, isn't the actual boiling pot or the indoctrination happening within the education system of so many young people today around the world?
Absolutely. It's the worst dirge upon the society in the United States is public education because it is controlled by political correctness. You're not allowed to, really discuss in any depth Western culture. You're not allowed to criticize, the leftists or the socialists or the communists. You're not allowed to criticize or even debate evolution in American public schools. You've got to accept that as the status quo. And so this is a wave of propaganda that is slowly eroding away our base. Now, despite all of that, and it's an interesting test of humanity, and I think that's why God allows so much of this evil on earth to occur and to take power, is that it's an ultimate test of people's who's going to sense the proper truth that comes to their inner mind of conscience, despite the wave of propaganda, because it does happen. Now, there's a lot of people that used to go along with what was right because they didn't know one way or the other and they didn't have a proper test. Now you can't simply leave it to chance. You've got to really educate your children. That's why I'm telling all people, get your children out of public school. Get your grandchildren out of public school. I know it's a sacrifice. My wife and I homeschool all 6 of our children and now highly professional, highly competent people. And we're way ahead of their peers, even when they were in our household. And the best thing about it in homeschooling was that they weren't subject to the inane, social, infectious attitudes that you get into public schools. the backbiting, the bullying, the other types of, even the sexual orientation, which is just overwhelming in public. Who's dating who? Who's sleeping with who?
Yeah.
Our kids didn't have to face that until they were older, more mature, and capable of understanding the temptations and the desires there. So the social aspects of public schooling is the worst threat to face, even worse than the academics, which you can overcome, but you can't undo the social infectious diseases that occur in public schooling.
Right. Now, Joel, I've got a lot of South Africans who are watching this live stream right now. And the persecution of the white minority population in South Africa is self-evident and growing daily under this gangster ANC government in South Africa. Race-based employment laws and large-scale corruption have destroyed what was a prosperous country. What message of hope would you give to white South Africans watching this live stream right now, or who might watch it later?
I will tell you frankly, Scott, I don't have any hope, except that you must band together in smaller and more carefully designed enclaves to protect yourself. There is no hope within the majoritarian government controlled by the ANC. And the powers that be in globalism around the world want the communists in charge. They want the destruction that happens because it doesn't happen in their name. They allow the communists to destroy free markets and destroy people and their property and throw whites off of their property. But I can tell you, the only salvation at all, and it's only short term and medium term, there is no long-term hope, even in America, of regaining political control of a constitutional republic. It's over because of the power of the deep state and satanic influence and guiding and directing a lot of that. And so I don't want to give people false hope that there is some magic bullet that's going to happen politically and otherwise. It's only through retrenchment, banding together, self-protection, defense, learning arms and other things that you're going to be able to survive. That's the purpose of Earth. The Earth purpose isn't to have a happy-go-lucky, successful, wealthy environment. The purpose of Earth is to do what's right under whatever situation you've been thrown under. And you're being thrown under the bus, have been for years now in South Africa, and you've got to learn defensively. You've got to band together and prepare to defend, even physically, for your lives and your property.
Right. Now, Joel, I can tell you there are hundreds of thousands of white South Africans who are desperate to get out of South Africa.
Yes.
They're feeling like they are frogs in the proverbial pot, which is about to boil. They fear, with some good reason, a genocide building against them. This is the biggest untold tragedy unfolding before our eyes today. How can we get a country like the United States to offer these people amnesty?
I don't think it's going to happen because the deep state doesn't want you free from the tyranny of the ANC. And, someone like Donald Trump, there's a possibility he could do something, but, he just has so little background in conservative law, politics, or even constitutional law that he's a slave to his advisors, and they, of course, talk against this. I was on an airplane with a guy out of Rhodesia, when it was being taken down after Mr. Smith was removed, and they were starting to take farms, and he was optimistic. Says, no, I'm going to go back, we're going to make it, etc. I later met him in Europe. He had escaped Rhodesia, had to leave without any of his money and without his farm, which had been lost to the blacks, etc. But he was once again free, and he rebuilt because he got out illegally. And that's what I would say. If you really want to get out, illegals are let in all the time throughout these countries. Join the ranks of the illegals. Do whatever it takes to ferret out your money, sell your property, try to get out if you want to have. But ultimately, I'm trying to say, no nation is going to tolerate liberty, even the United States, to the degree. It's still more open and free than what you're up against in South Africa. But this is a worldwide onslaught against liberty from globalism, and that's the real essence, and it's not going to go away simply by escaping from South Africa. But I will say, if I were in South Africa, I'd be out of there. I'd escape.
So you'd go to another country illegally and just hide?
Yes. Well, and not just hide. You can gain illegal status, even though you're not one of the preferred illegals that have, there are ways around it. And, you guys in South Africa are smart enough to do what it takes, and there are ways to do it. I can't discuss it openly, but
right. Can you send me an email with that?
No, not even an email.
Okay, all right. Maybe we'll have a private conversation sometime about that. Now, again, talking about Donald Trump and the U.S., would the United States step in militarily if it became evident that a genocide against the white population was taking place in South Africa?
I frankly doubt it. They would say, oh, this is terrible what's happening, but they wouldn't interfere. It's just politically incorrect to go up against, blacks that are against whites. Just you look at what's happening in the United States, kowtowing and bowing down to the Black Lives Matter movement, which is, they don't care a whit about the blacks. It's an excuse to be able to shove down the throats of Americans an agenda of socialism and of control, of defunding the police and funding ridiculous social scientists and psychologists, as if that's going to solve the problem of black crime and broken families in the black community. They've been there for years. It's never solved anything.
Right. Now, what you're actually saying is that our generation, I'm talking about older people like you and myself and other people who might be watching, really had the best lives when they had freedom. And what's happening is it's like more and more controlled. And I want to talk about things like this new COVID-19 passport, which you might have heard of, that they're going to try and push out to people, which sort of shows where you are on a GPS and all that sort of stuff. It's another form of control, but we'll get to that shortly. I just want to keep with South Africa for a moment. Now, this is something that really disturbs me, and you can actually Google this to confirm what I'm saying. Open Society Foundation Fund Plus. Now, Plus is a non-government organization, or NGO, operating out of the Western Cape in South Africa. Professor Ruth Hall is a senior member of Plus, who operates out of the University of the Western Cape. Ruth Hall compiles the expropriation without compensation, or EWC, policy for the ANC government. This Soros-compiled policy is then rubber-stamped by the ANC government in Parliament. Policies and laws like this are aimed at enriching the black privileged while ruining the white population. Isn't this compiling of laws for South Africa by an outside-controlled NGO unlawful?
It's difficult to make the case because there's no specific law which addresses it. So it has to be by interpretation of law, and your judges probably will not back that up. This is influence, what the globalists are good at, what George Soros is good at. The Open Society Foundation is probably the biggest implementer of socialist, globalist policy throughout the world, with billions of dollars behind it. And, and the Netherlands went after George Soros for his money, for having interfered in their financial affairs. But he's protected in so many places. It just didn't stop him, and it won't stop him. I'm just, worried that even if you had a tight legal argument, your judges who are globalist controlled would not back you up. I really have very discouraged about any ability to use the legal system, to defend our rights anymore, because they're on the other side. Judges do not get appointed who believe in defending the fundamental rights of the citizens of South Africa.
Right. Now, at the very start of this discussion, we talked briefly about COVID-19. I'd like to now get back to that particular subject. You mentioned that the tests were inaccurate, and people are asymptomatic. Just build on that situation for us. Give us a bit of a briefing on that.
Okay. Well, the CDC itself admitted, without admitting, to many details, that the COVID-19 test does not specifically isolate COVID-19. They didn't tell to what degree. Look, when you know what COVID-19 is, the only way to distinguish it from other SARS-type viruses is to show that there has been a splicing. And people who have the genome know that there's a splice in from an HIV, there's a splice in from MERS, and from other viruses into that. So to provide a test, the only valid test possible of a COVID-19 is to pull apart the DNA or the RNA that you get out of the swab sample and go through a complete genome test and breakdown of it. Nobody's doing that. They're simply picking a RNA register that is common to almost all coronaviruses itself. And that means that most people who test positive don't have COVID-19. They have a coronavirus. But it isn't, and that's why it isn't infectious. That's why 80% of people are asymptomatic. And the WHO director in the Dutch, in Brussels, who, her name is Kirchhoff, and she's a medical doctor, and she said, our data shows that there is no, or very rare, that there's any infection from anyone who is asymptomatic to another person. Now, you haven't read that about the media, but it's in the alternative media, her statement. And I'll tell you, the WHO is probably threatening her right now to backtrack on that statement, because it's the entire justification for everything is the high numbers of people who test positive for HIV. But it's meaningless, because if 80% of them are asymptomatic, that means they really don't have COVID-19, because it's a pretty powerful influenza. And if you're not having any symptoms, you really don't have it. And that's what they can't justify having. But even if you take the numbers, look at the numbers in the United States, 100,000 people, have died supposedly for COVID-19. We have time and again doctors telling how they've been pressured by the hospital to declare a person dead from COVID-19, even though they died of a heart attack or Lou Gehrig's disease or pneumonia. There's a fellow, I have personal people who know of people who have died of other causes, and the hospital has changed the death certificate to COVID-19 because they have a perverse incentive, being given $13,000 from the federal government for every patient that's COVID-19 positive. They get $39,000 for anyone who they put on a ventilator, even though 80% of people who go on ventilators die. There's a perverse financial incentive for this entire thing. But that's how they get doctors. The medical profession, Scott, is one of the most coerced, high-pressure profession there is. If you deviate from establishment medical protocols, you'll lose your license. You'll be removed from hospital privileges. It's the death knell to doctors, and they have a lot of clubs that are hanging over them to be able to toe the line on this COVID-19. And that's part of how the falseness of this pandemic is progenited. And there have been several doctors that have come out and bucked the trend and said that the emperor has no clothes, that this is not a serious problem, but very, very few.
So who's behind funding these doctors?
Well, that's a complex situation. First of all, remember that a lot of doctors get kickbacks from the big pharmaceuticals for the drugs that they prescribe.
Right.
And, of course, there's a great deal of federal public funding for WHO, which President Trump is challenging. Billions of dollars going to WHO, which funds only doctors who will toe this line. Then there's Dr. Fauci, the sky is falling Fauci, who continues. In fact, he was the one who came out and contended against Dr. Kirchhoff of the Netherlands and said, this is not true that people who are asymptomatic are not infectious. He gave no proof of that. She said, we have the data. Now, the WHO isn't publishing that data, but she's seen the data as part of the internal organization, Dr. Fauci. showing his deep state background. There's a deep state agenda to taking away our liberties through this falsified pandemic. And Fauci is clearly deep state. I documented in the World Affairs Brief how he conspired to, steal the HIV patent, et cetera, and other things. And this guy's got a long history of corruption within the medical establishment, is in charge of the National Institute of Health with millions of dollars of budgets. He's the one, by the way, who authorized the $3.7 billion funding authorization for the Wuhan lab in China to take all the COVID-19 research that they were prohibited from subbing out to the University of North Carolina by federal law. And so he subbed that out to the Wuhan virus, knowing that it would escape because of the poor safety protocols of the Wuhan lab. So I think Dr. Fauci is part of the conspiracy to get this virus out so that they could take advantage of it and shut down people's liberties. Now, in terms of the passport you're talking about, yes, they are aiming for that. I covered a couple of weeks ago on the World Affairs Brief about Apple and Google getting together with Android and Apple telephones to make sure that there was an app that was downloaded that would facilitate contact tracing. It works by turning on your Bluetooth and connecting with anyone else in the area who's got Bluetooth, relaying that information back. And if anybody turns up to have had a positive test, that you're in the medical records, then you get quarantined because you have been, part of that contact tracing. It's interesting that both, or Apple especially, because this was a voluntary downloading app, this contacting app, that they knew a lot of people would reject, they now put it in as part of the new updated operating system. And I have a friend who has an iPhone, and he said, I was notified by Apple that once you update to this new operating system, you will not be able to return to the prior operating system. In other words, you can't go back. Once you've got the new one, which has this contact tracing built into it, you will never be able to go back. So Apple is part of this. Android is not to that point yet, but I suspect they will be. So beware, do not automatically update your phones. You have to get into the settings pretty deep into it to find out how to block automatic updates, but you need to do that.
Right. Now, what is Bill Gates' influence over the World Health Organization? And in particular, when it comes to vaccines and what he's trying to do?
Well, Bill Gates is the biggest private funder of vaccine research, giving millions, and of the WHO. He donates to the Center of Disease Control. All of it is for vaccine-oriented research, of which Gates Foundation puts patents out about these things so that they can financially reap the rewards. Bill Gates has actually increased his network through his involvement in the international medical establishment and the vaccine production. He gets kickbacks from the vaccine manufacturers that he funds in terms of research. So he's really the Darth Vader, I'm afraid, of private charities in terms of influencing this globalist objective. I think he has a very evil agenda. He believes in depopulation. His father was one of the heads of Planned Parenthood in the Seattle area who believed in depopulation agenda. They're very, very big about genetics, about, and of course, it's easy to relate that to the Nazis, of course, in trying to, produce the master race, so to speak. But even Bill Gates' father believed in that type of a society. And Bill Gates, claims that, he's going to reduce population because of vaccination. His excuse is that vaccinated people won't have to worry about having so many children, and that's what reduced. But he knows, I think, that the vaccines are dangerous and that can be doped with abortificants and other things, as they have been done in the past in Africa, to depopulate the nation. So I think this is a very dangerous bioweapons that are meant purposely to kill off people, as well as vaccines that damage the immune system, make you more susceptible to these viruses that are being weaponized in biolabs.
So your advice to anybody listening to this video is don't go near a vaccination. Especially
right.
when you consider the stuff they put in them. like
That's right.
little babies or parts and stuff like that. Tell us about that.
Well, there's an article, John Rappaport of Global Research has done lion's share work of all of the research on the dangers of vaccine. His blog is very, very good. And, he talks about all of and this comes from the Vaccine Research Institute, which is a mainstream thing. They have actually gone through on vaccine safety and done a detailed analysis of everything that is in vaccines. And it's a horror story. Not only heavy metals, not just mercury and things, but other particles and things, not just aluminum, but there's titanium particles they found. They found other metallurgical parts that can't be removed by the bodies. These are bioincompatible things. There's nanoparticles which are capable of penetrating cells that they found in vaccines, as well as other viruses and body parts, that other DNA and RNA from other human genome that get into vaccines is very, very dangerous. So it's no wonder that people have a plethora of immune system problems when you take vaccines. And that's what makes them susceptible. Literally every person who's claimed died of COVID-19 that isn't chronically ill is immunodeficient, has immunodeficiency either through HIV, they're gay, or other types of things. As the only young people that die from COVID-19 are people who have immunodeficiencies. And I believe that those immunodeficiencies come from a combination of drugs, pharmaceutical drugs that they're taking, which weakens their immune system, or especially vaccines and flu shots, which purposely have adjuvants in them, which trick the immune system into not attacking the vaccine, which make autoimmune diseases. When you train the immune system and trick them to attack other things other than the vaccine, you cause a great deal of damage. So this new vaccine is supposedly going to be an RNA vaccine, modified genome that is put into your body that will manufacture antibodies. But it's irrelevant anyway, because COVID-19, there's already at least 30 variants of COVID-19, according to virologists. And so like the flu shot, it's not going to attack necessarily even if you had it, the type that is going to attack you, because it keeps mutating, and that's the way viruses are. You can never have a vaccine against a virus because the chances of it mutating are an absolute 100% chance.
Right. So what you're saying in effect is that this whole thing about a vaccine is BS.
Indeed it is, and you should never take another vaccine, and especially children, because children don't have a developed immune system. They are particularly vulnerable. And that means you have to go away from hospital births, which more and more, especially in the United States, are requiring that you vaccinate your baby, or they're called child services, and take your baby away from them. That's what they threaten to do in some hospitals. So you're going to have to go to home birth. We have a thriving midwifery profession in the United States. I don't know about South Africa, but you've got to learn to stay out of the hospitals, because they become the portal to which they require vaccinations of children. And that's the most dangerous time that you would ever be vulnerable to a vaccine. The only reason that adults sometimes don't get sick from vaccines is their immune system kills the bad stuff in the vaccine. But if you've got in anywhere a weakened immune system, you're vulnerable. And children are particularly vulnerable. So don't take vaccines. Get used to getting out of the establishment medical system. Learn to heal yourself. Learn about natural remedies and vitamins and minerals and living healthily. That's my message to people. And start to homeschool and consider home birth for people who are at childbirth age.
Right. Now, we have a resident doctor who often is on live streams here, and he talks about a variety of subjects. And his name is Philippe. And I raised a question with him about how do you say to a doctor, I don't want to have a vaccination, because apparently that is not, you can't refuse based on that. And he said to me, what you have to do is you have to ask the doctor the question. You have to say to him, is this vaccine potentially dangerous to me? And he will have to answer yes. And you can then say, well, then on that basis, I am refusing to have the vaccine, and he can't then enforce it.
That's right. There are other ways to do it too. You can also ask for the list of side effects that come with the vaccine. He's got it. It comes with every case of vaccines. ask him to show it to you, read off the list, and say, based upon the dangers in this list of what you're recommending, I cannot accept. And if you demand as a matter of service, then I want you to sign this paper that you will absorb the liability if there's any damage to me. Believe me, none of them will absorb the liability.
That's a very good point.
The vaccine manufacturers are not liable in the United States, and I don't know how they are in South Africa, but I assume it's the same. But doctors can be made liable, and they know that. And that's why you say, you sign this assuming liability if anything happens to me or my child, Still, you should never accept it because they won't really sign. They'll never sign it. You can use that excuse to walk away and say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it.
Right. No.
But you've got to be prepared. You have pediatricians who won't see you now, at least in the United States, unless you agree to vaccinations. And so you have to go elsewhere. You do not have to have a pediatrician. You can learn yourself how to overcome disease and treat your children. I can tell you, except for an accident I had, which required hospitalization and minor surgery, I have never been to a hospital, to a medical office because of an illness.
Right.
And that isn't because I'm just lucky. It's because I work hard at not being obese, exercising, eating properly. And when I do have things, I've learned how to develop, whether it's colloidal silver or other thing for infections or other things, or you go to a doctor and you have a tooth extraction or you have a root canal and they want you to take antibiotics. I never take antibiotics. There's always natural antibiotics that you can take, which don't destroy your gut bacteria, your beneficial gut bacteria, which makes your immune system very, very degraded. So you've got to learn, people, how to take care of yourself and stay away from the medical establishment.
Right. Now, I want to get back to this vaccine because there's so much talk about a vaccine that you take which will have a tiny chip in it, which will then basically be in your body, and it'll be like your marker, that they can trace to see if you've had vaccines, or apparently in the future you'll be able to do banking through this chip or get through doors by just this chip being recognized. Do you think that's part of this whole slavery agenda of the deep state?
Well, it is their long-term goal to be able to track individuals and to have the ultimate say about whether or not you can buy or sell in community. This is the book of Revelation's mark of the beast, fear that we all read about here. I personally don't think they're going to be able to get at that through vaccination because not everybody's going to take a vaccine. And besides, it's very difficult to get people to accept a chip injection, which they have to notify you of. What they're developing is a differential invisible ink marker that is like an invisible tattoo that can be read on your hand that shows that you have been vaccinated. That can be offered as a passport for those that refuse to have the chip. But ultimately, they're going to use the fact, and the airlines are buying into this, you won't be able to fly now. It'll be part of this TSA checkpoint type thing that you've got your vaccination. I'm glad I'm a private pilot. I probably never will fly again on the airlines because I could bypass all that, by flying myself. But not everybody can do that. But that's what they're going to do. And ultimately, I predict, because I think that all of this control agenda of partial loss of liberty because of this COVID-19 is preparing us for the kind of martial law and control that will happen after World War III starts. I believe ultimately, the ultimate restriction on your ability to travel, to buy or sell, or to be part of a business, or to be employed anywhere is going to be the new citizenship this global New World Order is going to require, to ferret out those that believe that this global government is part of a globalist conspiracy, like myself, who won't take the new citizenship. And that's what happens when you get into a global, militarized global government. There'll be a new citizenship, a new pact, and you won't be able to serve as a doctor, lawyer, or any certified business, etc., unless you take the new citizenship. You'll be a legal alien. That's what I predict is long term. And so this is preparatory, getting people to take a vaccine or a chip or a mark on the hand that will be invisible, that can be read by a scanner. But it's coming. And so it's very, very important to be where you want to be in a strategically more safe location when that global order locks down, because it's going to prohibit people from traveling and from transferring from one nation to another without permission.
Right. Now, you mentioned World War III. What do you think is going to be the catalyst for that actually starting? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yes, I do. I believe it's going to be North Korea. I think the reason why Russia and China have always kept North Korea as the pariah of the world with nuclear weapons now is that they're the perfect foil to start the war. And they are powerful enough and have enough nuclear weapons that the U.S., in order to protect its troops in South Korea, would probably have to respond with the least tactical nukes to North Korea to stop that invasion. When North Korea won't start it on its own. It'll be done under some guise of a provocation. North Korea is always rattling the saber, just as they have this week, threatening the United States if you interfere in our affairs. Sadly, Donald Trump has not taken down Kim Jong-un and his nuclear weapons system as he promised he would do if diplomacy failed. He fails at all of his promises, essentially, to the conservatives. But if the U.S. responded to a North Korean attack on the South with tactical nuclear weapons, I think Russia and China would use that as the excuse to say, you started it, and then do their planned preemptive strike with nuclear missiles on long-range missiles on U.S. and UK and French nuclear targets. And I think they're going to plan a decapitating strike on U.S. military, and the U.S. military is going to let that fall. That's what I've described in my briefings as Presidential Decision Directive 60, 1997, which instructed our missile forces to absorb a nuclear first strike and not retaliate till afterwards. That first strike being absorbed is the globalist mandate that we get decapitated militarily so they can talk everyone in the West into joining a militarized global government. I think that's how it's going to start.
So, what sort of government would this new world order that be then? Would it be a communist government where everybody is?
No.
What would it be?
No, in fact, for the first time, the globalists will say, we'll exclude the communists. You allow Red China to have a seat on the Security Council in Russia, which is still a communist country. The phony fall of the Soviet Union only, with the Communist Party went underground. They still run the show through Putin. But they will then call it something else like the League of Democracy. It will be exclude the communists, so it'll only be Western nations. And it will be like the EU. And that's why the EU didn't want the UK out, and they didn't get out, actually. It was a false Brexit that Boris Johnson compromised on. They still are tied to most of the EU restrictions, including the secret funding, which Britain agreed to under the table, secret funding of the new EU army, which I believe is the seed stock for the new globalist army that will emerge after the U.S. military is decapitated. But it will be a total control system. Now, they'll always tell you, you still have your fundamental rights. You have the right of free expression and the right to property and all this. But there are all these, just like in the EU Constitution, these little caveats, except when society needs require that you sacrifice those rights. There's all those kinds of caveats in the language of the EU Constitution. That's the way the global government will operate. It won't be communist, but it will be socialist, but a milder form of communism. They won't control the means of production. It'll be fascism. Fascism is a socialist economic order, Fabian socialism, by the way, where you own the property, but the government. That's what real fascism is, like in the Nazi era. It has nothing to do with racism, which the left has conflated with fascism to give it a different term.
Right. Now, we're talking here about nuclear weapons, and apparently both China and Russia have hypersonic speed nuclear weapons that go something like 5 or 6 times the speed of sound. Now, surely, if what you're talking about happens where Russia and China put on preemptive strikes on America, France, and the UK and other parts of the world, surely that will pretty well destroy the world as we know it, because you'll have like a nuclear winter.
No, not true. The Russians and Chinese do not intend to attack cities, only military targets. They don't want to destroy the West, which they depend on. You know, communist countries can never feed themselves, let alone come up with innovations necessary to progress. And they depend on the West for that. So they want to harness the West without destroying it. That's why they're going to target only military targets. And the Western globalists know this. And that's why they've got underground bunkers and all their major bases that will be hit, etc. But they know that they're only going to attack military targets. No nuclear winter. That's an anti-nuclear myth that has been promulgated for many, many years. If you took all of the nuclear weapons in the world and put them on a mountaintop, it wouldn't destroy as much of the mountain as Mount St. Helens did when it blew in 1983 in the United States. They're not as powerful as you think. And the radiation dissipates within a couple of weeks. And of course, in a prolonged scenario of attacks, you know, so fallout is the major problem, not nuclear destruction of cities, which China doesn't intend to do. They want to cleanse America through bioweapons after that nuclear attack. But I believe the globalists are prepared with space-based nuclear weapons to stop the second wave of attacks while they regroup under the military. And that's why they're going to let the first strike fall. They wouldn't be stupid enough to let it fall if they did not have a backup plan to win the war after absorbing a nuclear first strike.
And do you think this is why Trump started a space division in the army?
Well, it was already started. They talked him into, of course, and you know, Trump has a big ego. He loves to, you know, announce new things, but it's already been going. In fact, General Mattis, when he spoke at a major accounting conference in private with a lot of high-flying accountants, said, "You'd be surprised how many trillions of dollars we put into space that aren't on the budget." Now, that was before the Space Force was announced. So they've been doing some big things in space for many, many years, and Russia and China just playing catch up to that. But I think that's their secret second weapon to deter any further nuclear strikes on the West and on cities after the initial strike on military targets.
Right, but then what's the role of SpaceX that NASA's using with you know, Elon Musk and his new space program?
Well, I mean, there's obviously they're redoing the entire global positioning system. They have all kinds of satellites, secret and otherwise, going into business. I think they have killer satellites out there, just like Russia and China are trying to develop. You know, the ostensible things about communication satellites, all that is going on and important. So I'm not sure how much SpaceX knows about what kind of cargo they're carrying. But you know, the U.S. has been putting secret satellites into orbit, you know, for decades up there. And nobody knows, you know, what's in those satellites. Right. And I don't think Elon Musk necessarily, he's a contractor. He's out there to make money.
Which is the safest, if you consider what you're talking about here with the World War III and what's going on, which would be the safest country in the world to be in when things start unraveling? Would it be Australia or would it be New Zealand? Because a lot of very rich people seem to be coming to New Zealand.
Those are the two worst choices that I could make. Even though Australia and New Zealand have some fine aspects of survival, the point is, Australia has sold all of its mineral rights to China. And China has active military presence and control presence in Australia. I can guarantee you that China is going to occupy both Australia and New Zealand when World War III starts. They're going to take everything from Japan all the way down through the Philippines, through Australia and New Zealand. Guaranteed. You don't buy up all the mineral rights and need those mineral rights for military production without occupying the nation. So that's the least safe country, other than, you know, Japan is not safe. They've got a grudge match with Japan. It's going to be taken down during World War III. No. So I say, yeah, still,
yeah,
the safest place, you know, safety is inversely proportional to the number of people. If you probably got up into the wilds of Canada, you might be safe, but you'd have to live, you know, very nomadic, you know, existence up there. The big problem with Canada, even though it's got the most wide open territory in terms of uncontrolled territories, its government is really a globalist puppet state. And you have no gun rights in Canada. It's very, very oppressive. You have no free speech rights. It's further advanced even than the United States. The United States, despite the fact that it's going to be the target, its military bases are going to be the target of the first strike, still has my top rating for the safest country. And the reason I say that is because there's no other country in the world that has of gun owners and resistant people in the United States. And that's what it's going to come down to. And we do not have an overwhelming majority of black minority people who can overcome the white resistance that will happen in the United States. And this coronavirus is building a resistance in the United States, and so is the Black Lives Matter. In Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, for example, you had over 1,000 people show up with semi-automatic weapons to defend the city because there was a rumor that Antifa was going to invade the city in a black riot of violence. Now, it turned out to be a rumor, but nevertheless, you think of that in any other country. Could that happen in South Africa? Would 1,000 people show up at a small town in South Africa with AK-47s or AR-15s and not be arrested by the government? But it happens in the United States, and it would happen even more. So it's the ability to resist, not as a country, but as a people and band together in the remnant, as I call them, people who are religious and conservative and willing to fight for their rights. There's no other higher percentage than in the United States of America of those people.
Right. Now, talking about World War III, will that happen in our lifetime? I mean,
absolutely.
So,
I am 100% sure that Russia and China intend to attack the West. 100% sure. This is not a doubt if, but when. And the only question of when is two things. One, when they're ready militarily. And despite all the hype about hypersonic weapons, they have not got very many in deployable status yet. That will take till the latter half of this decade. So I think it's highly probable this World War III will happen before the end of this decade. And you've got to be prepared for it. You've got to be relocated if you're going to relocate to safer places before. And if you can't relocate, you've got to be prepared at least to defend yourself in two ways. One, against fallout, because you don't want to be in a blast area. If you're near a military base, then move. Don't spend $100,000 in blast protection. Just relocate. But you've got to have fallout protection. You've got to have concealed storage for food supplies and for equipment supplies and weapons and ammunition. It doesn't do any good to have it in a safe in your home. You've got to have concealed underground storage. So do a basement. And you've got to have a place to hide people. We're going to be the Jews of World War III. We will be hunted by governments. People who believe in conspiracy, who believe in defending their rights, will be hunted. So you've got to be able to hide people. You don't want to try to make those preparations in the midst of a war when they're watching everything under martial law, when you can't get to the store, or after an EMP strike when there's nothing in the stores. These things need to be prepared in advance.
Okay, now, how will Africa be affected? Would China just walk into Africa and take over Africa?
Yes, China's got a lot of influence in Africa, and the ANC, of course, is a communist organization. They are beholden to either Russia and China or both, depending on who's the stronger. But I personally think that Russia's going down in World War III. I think that China will actually betray Russia and eliminate it, just as the globalists in the West and Russia eliminated Nazi Germany. I think Russia's going down as a world power after World War III, and then it'll be China versus the West. So I think China will occupy a great portion of Africa, and that's your greatest danger.
Right. Well, I have to say I agree with you. I think China is making huge moves in Africa. And
it is.
They're buying up all the utilities, which is kind of what the countries depend on. Now, I'm going to just address the side chat. We've been talking for over an hour. Guys, if you have questions you want to put to Joel, please just put them in the side chat now. I've got a few questions here for you, Joel, from people. Okay, Now, Nellis has asked, what does Joel think about the global lawful rebellion? Apparently that's some YouTuber who talks about that.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what he refers to. Now, there is a general rebellion against globalism, as exemplified by all the anti-globalist parties in France, the National Party, and the Freedom Party in Austria, the Brexit Party, but most of these, will never achieve more than minority status. Only in Austria have they been able to do a coalition government with the Conservative Party there in Austria and gain. But even they were, the leader of the Freedom Party was overturned by an NSA spy trap, which got him, to resign. So this is a very difficult thing. I don't believe that we'll ever receive or through democracy or democratic means be able to get a majority to overthrow. The enticement of global trade, controlled global trade, is too enticing for the mainstream to ever go to the rebellion standpoint. Now, if by the rebellion in YouTube on the global, they're talking about Q. Q is a disinformation expert in the United States, part of the deep state, falsely giving people the hope that Donald Trump is going to overturn the deep state. And ultimately, there's a tremendous foolish following of Q, thinking that, he's cryptic. Conservatives, true libertarian people are never cryptic. They're open. There's no such thing as anybody who's anti-deep state that stays within government, because the NSA can ferret out anybody. They can track anything. You can't tell me that the deep state doesn't know who Q is, and they allow him to continue to post. So there's this false hope about eliminating the deep state. I say count on the deep state not going away and learning to fight against it and cover and concealment and getting out of the way is probably the better strategy in this regard.
Right. So you mentioned Q. Tell us who Q is. I've heard of QAnon. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, we're talking about QAnon. And nobody knows. Once again, this is a conspiracy. He claims to be, cryptic because he has to hide his identity within the Trump administration, but he's allies with Trump. But so many of things that he has prophesied have been false. He said that Trump was joining forces with Robert Mueller, his arch enemy, and they were going to overthrow the deep state. Well, Robert Mueller is deep state. He's promised that there was going to be prosecution of 35,000 deep state people by Donald Trump. They were going to ship to Guantanamo. Never happened. Total fabrication.
So it's BS.
It's BS. He keeps hope alive.
Yeah.
By people who want to believe in a savior. I say, don't believe in a savior. There's not going to be any savior. You're going to have to depend on yourself, joining forces informally, because militia groups and armed groups that meet together always get infiltrated by government. But it has to be informal. You have to be careful. You have to do things in secret. You got to be smart about it. But don't believe in the false hope that Q is providing.
Now, it's interesting because Marlena says rumors are that Trump Jr. will take over as president. Now, I was just about to ask you that question. Post-Trump, who would be someone who could have that same kind of vision as Trump to keep it going, America going the same way, to try and take on the deep state?
Well, it has to be somebody who understands the deep state in the first place. And Donald Trump's children are mainstream people, if not more liberal than Donald Trump. And of course, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and Ivanka, these people are on the Democratic side. These are very, very mainstream people who really don't support a lot of what their father's doing. But you've got to remember that Donald Trump has no ability to follow through with what he's good at recognizing what a great selling point is to conservatives. I think he's sincere. I think he really does believe he wants to make America great. But he also loves his ego. He loves his pride. He loves his presidency. And so he will compromise because he wants to stay in office. He wants to be reelected. There is no hope for anyone politically in the United States rising to the presidency because they can even control the elections. The fraud in American elections is rampant. Donald Trump got elected in spite of about 10% fraud that worked in favor of Hillary Clinton. He still got elected. They didn't expect it. They've been angry ever since and want him out of there. But I'll tell you, anybody who really ran on principles, Donald Trump was not a principled person. He wasn't principled. He was a populist. You can't win without appealing to universal health care and universal to to pander to some of the Black Lives Matter. In the shift in political mentality, people continue to shift leftward. This is not the same society it was in America when Donald Trump was elected. I think it's been undermined. And so it'll be very difficult unless the Democrats continue to shoot themselves in the foot and put someone like Biden, who can't win, I believe. Donald Trump's going to get reelected. But it would be a real problem up against Hillary Clinton, I think, if she runs again.
You think she can?
Oh, yes, absolutely. She's intending to.
So she's going to try and push Biden off the chair?
No, I think the powers that be will tell Biden he's got to resign because of, the charges against him and his inept mental condition, which is serious. He makes a lot of gaffes in his verbal stuff. Now, the media could try to, salvage him, et cetera, but I just think it's pretty chancy. Against a debater like Donald Trump, I don't think Biden would survive.
No, I think he'd be torn apart.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, again, let's have a look at the questions. Okay, Dries Visser says, please ask if it is possible they're using this stir-up after COVID-19 to maybe start the Third World War, turn race against race and destroying the United States' strength and targeting Trump.
Well, there's a lot of questions involved there. First of all, I don't believe in the Civil War scenario. There really is no sentiment for civil war. This is war of law enforcement or the rule of law against violent protesters, which there's no sympathy for really in the United States. Only with the elite. The power elite are sympathetic. The media are sympathetic. But more and more they're turning off American people. I'll tell you, if Minneapolis goes through and defunds the police, there is going to be riots in the street if there are businesses not protected and police and homicides go up. Look, in Los Angeles, just talking of defunding, homicides went up last week 250%. The people are not going to stand for that if the left pushes through. They may be moving too fast on this. So I think the move really is to continue to have turmoil, both COVID-19 and Black Lives turmoil through the election to destabilize the nation so that people will hopefully, according to the deep state, want to pick a Democrat and a controlled candidate rather than Donald Trump. But going back to your original question, there is no heir apparent to Donald Trump. In fact, no true conservative can hope to compete with the promises Donald Trump made. You can't do it in principles. You can't promise that much. And so I think that it's we're actually in a worse off position as conservatives because no one is allowed to rise in leadership while Donald Trump is there, and he's failing, unfortunately, miserably in terms of defending us. Still, it's better than anything else that could happen because at least he's slowing down the globalist agenda. At least he is working on small parts of the wall and building the wall. It won't be effective until it's all built, and it won't all be built. But I just don't see a way out or a solution through a political savior.
Right. Now, you mentioned Clinton coming back in as an option for the presidential election. What about her facing court charges right now? Isn't that an aspect that'll just take her out of the equation?
No, when you look closely at what the Judge Sullivan, said, she must testify about the origin. Doesn't mean she has to tell the truth. She can give any number of excuses about the origin of the email server, why she put it up. They've got all these excuses ready for her to present. So she's going to testify, according to the judge, but she's not going to tell anything that's going to indict her on anything. This is an illusion, that she's going to somehow go to prison. This is going to absolve her. She's going to be able to say, "Now I testified. I told how the server came about," and it would take an NSA investigation, of course, to prove her wrong, and they won't do that. They just have to accept what she says. So this isn't really a victory.
Right. Now, Tim Fronimus has asked, please ask Joel his opinion of the feasibility of groups like Saatlanders in South Africa or elsewhere in the world. Are you familiar with Sakelanders?
I'm not particularly. This is one of the three groups that you talked about. There's three different options that conservatives in South Africa are trying to motivate or
Yeah, well, Sakelanders is like a organization with members, and the members in the time of crisis will be able to leave the towns and cities and go to like safe spots around South Africa. And I believe they've got about 100,000 members in South Africa.
Yeah, that's one of the organizations I think we talked about last time. And I am skeptical that of large group organizations controlling property or safe locations that you're going to have group survival to. First of all, big organizations that get targeted by the government, you can bet the government has spies in there. They'll know exactly what you're doing and they'll be preparing to counter it. I don't want to discourage it because it does help South Africans get used to organizing and at least preparing. But I can tell you that any open organization, big organization, is going to get infiltrated and countered. The wiser choice is for each person to have in their own local area, or at least to relocate to safer areas of South Africa where there are less population density, where they can have some self-sufficiency, and get underground secure storage and safe places and things, and develop a network informally without big organization, without big money, without big leaders and things that can get compromised. It hasn't worked in the United States despite all the preparedness movement. Every time you get a big preparedness group that wants to all relocate to a certain area, it doesn't work. It just doesn't fit enough people's criteria. It really is better for people to do things individually in safe locations and band together informally with people generally in the same area, but not in the same compound. You don't want a compound that can be targeted. You don't want, this Idaho compound called the Citadel. You can bet that would be targeted, if you ever built that. But it never works for most people.
Right. Now, there's another group called Boere Legion. Now, Boere Legion in South Africa is planning around the basis of having people who've got guns or in these little towns. If something really goes pear-shaped, they will then basically fortify that little town, that little community. And they've got these groups all over South Africa. Do you think that's got a better chance of working?
It does, depending on the specifics. You can fortify, but if you get the official government coming in with armed forces against even a fortified town with people with rifles and weapons, you're going to fall eventually. That's the big danger, is that you get the government to target you as an extremist group and take you down. They can always bring up a bigger gun, a bigger tank, etc., and wipe out the town. Now, even though that won't happen initially, etc., there's just going to be an awful lot of pressure. Can you see what I'm saying, though, and what I've always advised people in the United States? When you don't appear as a big target, a big organization, when you're decentralized,
right,
and you're networked informally with people, so that if one house gets under attack, he flees to another place, and they have secret hiding places where they hide people, etc. That gives them, they can flee to another place. It's hard to beat that kind of an informal system. Anything that's highly organized and pinpointed in a specific location could be easily targeted by the government.
I do have to say that the South African National Defence Force is a joke. They've apparently, according to Ian Cameron, who's the guy who is the safety and security man for AfriForum, he said that logistically they can only actually organize 3,000 individuals in the army to actually take on a particular project. That's in the South African National Defence Force.
Well, that may be true, but there's got to be remnants of the South African army left in South Africa, with equipment, with aircraft, with bombs, with other things. That's a different story going up against those if they decide to use that equipment against you in a fortified small town. Could be devastating.
Well, I'll give you an example of how ridiculous it is in South Africa. 68 vehicles were lost by the army since 1994, and the Minister of Defense blamed the camouflage on the vehicles for them losing them. I'm serious. This is what she did. They haven't got a clue. They're completely clueless. Now, I've got a question here from Tertia LaRue. And she says, can Scott please find out about the Volkswagen hospital they're building in Port Elizabeth? It's huge. Fits FEMA camps, features for depopulation. Then you never get out, apparently. Now, I'll tell you what she's talking about here. Volkswagen used to have this big factory. And they've turned one of these huge buildings into basically a hospital area where anyone who's got, well, this has now been kind of overturned in the courts, but the idea for the ANC was anyone who was shown to be positive with COVID-19 would then have to go and be quarantined in one of the beds in this huge room. And if they got critical, there was a secondary room attached where they would have ventilators and all the special gear for people who are really, really sick. And then attached literally through a doorway was a mortuary where people who died their bodies would be placed before burial. This was all in one big building. Now, the reference to FEMA camps, are you a believer that FEMA camps are actually being set up in America to actually control the population?
I'm skeptical. I've done a lot of research over the years on that, and most of the claimed FEMA camps turned out to be not true. There are prison camps, excess prison camps being built, and I think it's a much more sophisticated threat. A lot of excess prison camps being built for holding people. I just, most of the FEMA camp type of things turn out to be not true. But there is a lot of excess prison capacity being built, which is going to be for dissidents, in other words. But I would say about this, that sounds like a death camp to me. Remember, if you understand what I know about the COVID-19 test, there's an 80% chance you don't have COVID-19. You'll be put into a group concentration hospital with people with COVID, and you're going to get it eventually, and not have your proper nutrition, not have access to alternative therapies. And it's very easy to overcome the COVID-19 with mega doses of vitamin C, vitamin D3, and selenium and zinc. All right. You're not going to have access to any of that in that. And so don't ever allow yourself to get into a FEMA camp in a national emergency like happened in Hurricane Katrina. Those became concentration. You couldn't leave without permission, and you never got permission. So don't accept that. That's the time to escape and evade if they're going to take you into a forced quarantine.
Right. Now, I can't say this name. It's a Greek name, but he says, how can we join forces with these rebellious Americans? I guess he's in Europe.
Well, the only way right now, because there is no organization, central organization to that, is to be in the alternative media. And you see, that's an example of people wanting to join an organization. And I know of no large conservative organization, even in the United States, that doesn't get compromised. Because the larger the organization, the more money you need. You have to pay the hierarchy to run that, and they're not making a living anymore. They're living off contributions. And so it ends up being corrupted, whether it's the NRA and all of its excessive spending or other conservative groups. The bigger they are, the more they are tended to be softened in their approach, compromised, and corrupted.
Right. I have to tell you, just for your information, and I've heard the video, the CEO of YouTube. Now, you said just now that vitamin C is one of the vitamins you should take to actually defeat COVID-19. she is actually on record as saying that anyone who suggests that on YouTube will have their video taken down because it's fake news. I mean, this is how ridiculous things are.
Yeah. She has also said that anyone who doesn't toe or contradicts the official line of the WHO, the
Yes.
World Health Organization, will be banned from YouTube as well, and that affects that. So, Dr. Brownstein has been banned from YouTube. The FDA came after Dr. Brownstein and told him to cease and desist from ever publishing any natural remedies. I mean, these are things that have no adverse side effects, and yet they approve thousands of drugs per year that have deadly side effects.
Yeah.
This is just crazy. But there's a huge conspiracy in the medical establishment to pull and to destroy the alternative and vitamin market for people getting free. I mean, this is a closed system. They want you to be dependent on the medical establishment. That's why insurance companies only pay for establishment medical procedures. So it's a trap. Don't forget about having national health insurance. You want to be free from the medical establishment.
Right. Now, it's interesting you say that, because when I was a young man, I was about 21, 22, I had a very bad cut on my arm. And I was living in Greytown in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And I went to see the doctor. And he gave me what looked like water. It was actually some kind of treatment. And it was called Uracil, which stood for Edinburgh University Solution. And he told me that it was free. You know, the Edinburgh University who actually developed this were basically sending it out, and, you know, it was like not part of the pharmaceutical thing, although it was accepted as a cure. Now, if you try and search for Uracil now, which is EUSOL on Google, you'll see it's gone. Clearly, and I have to tell you, it was fantastic. I mean, that cut literally cleared up 4 or 5 times faster than one normally would. But that treatment, which was it was so inexpensive, it was ridiculous. It was like buying a bottle of water. It was just that cheap. Clearly, the pharmaceutical companies had a problem with it, and it was got rid of.
Yeah, very believable. My biggest remedy for cuts and other things and infection is tea tree oil. Just a marvelous antibacterial. And colloidal silver is excellent as well.
Yeah. Now, Lance Sheriff has asked, Joel, have you read The Third World War by General Sir John Hackett and other top-ranking NATO generals and advisors? Russian attacks, nuclear bomb explodes in the UK, etc., etc.
I haven't read the book. I just don't know what they're saying. No.
Okay. All right. Well, look, if there are any final questions, guys, please ask them now, because we're going to be shutting down the live stream shortly. But just turning to you, Joel, is there a message you would like to give to people who are watching this video now or who might watch it later regarding just what the hell is going on in the world today?
Well, that's a very broad-ranging question. I think it's important to realize that every government in the world is controlled by one of 3 predator centers. Either the Western globalists, Anglo-American globalists, control the Five Eyes, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, the UK, and the United States, or Russia and China. And those are 2 separate conspiracies. I believe all 3 of those conspiracies are satanic-based conspiracies. I think they're a revelatory power from Satan that directs them. And the way I can prove that is this globalist conspiracy, for example, has been on a consistent track since the turn of the century in 1900. And they have, let me silence my phone there. There's no way any single individual could have started this globalist track in 1900 and seen it to its conclusion. People die, even if you tell your son to carry on things. Even a mafia can't keep something going for past 2 generations. this can only happen because someone is revealing and directing this conspiracy against God, man, and liberty. And so what I'm saying is it's a very severe thing. Now, he does allow one or others of his conspiratorial powers to die, as Nazi Germany was allowed to die in order to build up the Soviet Union, which the globalists did. And I think World War III, Russia will die, and it'll be the globalists versus China as the ultimate weapons. And by the way, Israel is a puppet state of the Anglo-American globalists. But this is a big picture that I want people to understand. Don't get caught up in the fact of why can't we get along? There is systematic evil in the world, and that's what we're fighting against. And that's why we have to gain ultimately the protection of God by living righteously, doing what's right, following the promptings of conscience. There is no mechanistic way that you're going to be able, whether through my advice or anyone else, to be able to save yourself if you aren't listening to the promptings of a God who, in doing what's right, that you merit the blessings of protection. You're not going to survive this. So that would be my overall message.
Right. Now, in the Bible, it talks about the Antichrist in the final days. Do you think the Antichrist is alive and living amongst us right now?
Well, the ultimate Antichrist is Satan himself. So we're talking about, is there a single puppet master that he will rise up? And I'm not necessarily sure we ought to look for a single person. I think, in fact, that the entire globalist conspiracy is a satanic conspiracy, and that whatever head rises up to champion that, whether it's George Soros or Henry Kissinger or Prince Philip or anybody else who tries to manage these things, is ultimately working for Satan's purposes. And as for those of you who understand the Bible, read Isaiah chapter 14, where it talks about Satan descending into hell in chains, and all of the great men of the earth are waiting for him to come and save them. And they're disappointed in the sense they see him and they say, "Art thou brought low like unto us?"
Right.
That's symptomatic of the satanic pact that I will save you from the chains of hell. So all of these great leaders, or at least the majority of these great leaders, have bought into a pact with Satan and are counting on the immunity that it gives. And so that's what we're dealing with. This is a really powerful conspiracy, and we need the help of God to survive it.
Well, they certainly do seem to have satanic rituals at these
Yes, they do.
meetings that they hold, which are quite awful. Now, I got a message here from the moderators saying, "Don't shut down yet. Spanners and chatters organizing socials right now." So,
well, unfortunately, I'm writing my World Affairs Brief today, so I'm really out of time, Scott.
Right.
I'm not going to be able to stay on long.
yeah, not a problem. Can I just ask you one final question?
Yes.
Please ask what Joel thinks about these white women now kissing black men's feet. What message does that send to blacks in South Africa?
Well, it tells me that they are either crazy or they are such social misfits that they believe in kowtowing to the establishment so badly that they would do that. It's like the police officers in the United States washing the feet of the protesters,
Crazy.
symbolizing Christ. I mean, this is just, it's not that they are insane, it's just symptomatic of how bad political correctness has infected the mainstream people who do not see through this. And I just don't have any sympathy for that kind of bad thinking. That's just chronic bad judgment.
Yeah.
Conscience is screaming against this, and they are immune to conscience. So I see nothing. This is getting symptomatic. Watch this grow. Watch this pandering to the Black Lives Matter movement. This is indicative as the pandering. I was shocked at the pandering to the COVID-19 crisis, which was just so overblown. But it is symptomatic, and I warn people listening to me of the chronic bad judgment that is infecting our people in our society. It's chronic bad judgment. This does not portend well. There is no salvation when there is bad judgment among our people.
Right. Joel, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. Just to the moderators who are organizing the social on the side there, I'll actually keep the stream open so you guys can do that, but there won't be actually a discussion happening, and I'll give you half an hour, then I'll shut the stream down. How's that? Now, Joel, getting back to you, as I said, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. I hope we can do this again when things do change, perhaps after the lockdowns are completed around the world and the deep state come up with some other plan, or just an update on what's going on. That'd be fantastic. I just want to thank everybody who's been watching the video tonight for being part of the live stream, and please share this with your friends. Joel, I'll actually send you a link to the live stream that we've had tonight, just so you can have a look at it for yourself, or share it with people if you like to. But once again, thank you so much, and I know you're very busy. Please have a safe evening, and take care, and to everybody watching, the same. Please, guys, be safe. I'm going to shut down the live stream right now. Take care, but you're still able to make comments
Scott.
on the side.
Thanks, Scott, and God bless your people for listening in.
Thanks, Joel.